Welcome to the Justin Strawn Podcast. I am your host, Justin Strawn. Glad to be back with you for another session of recording. I don't know if the sound is fixed. Apparently, I was having some sound difficulties on the previous version of the live show, so I'm hoping that it gets fixed on this one, if it is, in fact, working. So I don't know. We'll find out. So, like I said, don't know if it's working out in Twitter land or not. But if you are listening on Twitter, appreciate it. If you're watching on Twitter while I go live, that would be awesome. If you are catching this on the recorded version, if you're on YouTube, if you're on Apple, if you're on Spotify, it would really help me a lot if you would hit those like, subscribe buttons, do all that fun stuff. It would help me out a whole lot in terms of getting the show into the ears of new listeners. If you're got an option to rate and review, if you can put those 5 stars, whatever it may be, thumbs up, however it is that they rate on whatever platform you use, that would help me out a lot as well. I'm also trying my best to get all the social media platforms out there as well. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're a TikTok user, all those things, I'm on them as well. So I would appreciate it if you could follow me on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, whatever it may be, whatever your preferred social media is. You can catch me there. And obviously I am on Twitter. Been on Twitter since 2013. So if you're there, or X as they call it nowadays, I would really appreciate it if you could follow and catch me wherever it is that you prefer. So like I said, all right, let's go ahead and get into this. We've got a busy week to talk about. I'm not probably going to talk to you about too much Mississippi State, not too much entertainment stuff, because it was such a big week for Mississippi State. So if you come to my podcast looking for all of the Mississippi State related items, probably not going to have a whole lot for you today, simply because the fact that we are talking so much about Mississippi State as a result. So, anyway, so let's go ahead and get into it. Big news item to start off. Mississippi State ends up hiring a new defensive coordinator. They let Coleman Hutzler go, which surprised me. I'll just go ahead and start there first. I was not expecting him to actually make Coleman Hutzler go. I've been critical of Jeff Lebby ever since I started this podcast. I've kind of been critical of him ever since he came on, just because there hasn't been a whole lot of success under the Jeff Lebby era. So I wasn't really expecting him to make the correct move and to let him go, because Coleman Hutzler was his bud, and this was one of those things that he wanted to make sure that he did, was to get some of his friends jobs once he got established as a head coach. And unfortunately, it did not go so well for Coleman Hutzler. Mississippi State had 2 of the worst defenses that we've ever seen in our time as Mississippi State fans when he took over as a defensive coordinator. Look, some of it was talent. There's no question about that. There was some talent issues there as well. But some of it was scheme. A lot of it was scheme as well. If you watched the Egg Bowl, it was pretty easy to see that adjustments weren't being made. Mississippi State wasn't doing anything to help Diego Brumfield, who was just getting killed on the field against Ole Miss during the Egg Bowl. He was just absolutely getting obliterated, and they weren't doing anything to provide help for him. They just kept putting him out on an island, and Ole Miss, to their credit, they found Kelly Jones. They found what side of the field that he was on whenever the play was getting ready to start, and they just said, we're not going to throw it in that direction. I mean, like the best film that Kelly Jones could turn over to an NFL scout and say, hey, here's the best film that I could give you about how good I am. Hand him the Ole Miss tape and say, and when he asks, I don't see you on here at all, that's because they didn't throw it at all. I mean, like they didn't even try. That's just how good Kelly Jones is. And it just also shows how much Diego Brumfield really struggled. And the fact, like I said, that they didn't do anything in terms of safety help. I mean, they weren't even trying to throw at Kelly Jones. I mean, maybe if they had put some safety help over there on Diego Brumfield's side, they might have tried to attack Kelly Jones at some point, but they didn't do anything. They just kept leaving him out on an island. And if he wasn't getting burnt to a crisp out there, then he was committing a penalty and causing pass interference or a hold. And that was about the only way that he could stop any of the Ole Miss receivers that he was covering at the time. So like I said, that was scheme stuff, and that's stuff that that was stuff that Coleman Hutzler should have been able to adjust and figure out ways to help him out and to not just leave him out there stranded all by himself. And he couldn't do it. He just either couldn't do it or he wouldn't do it. I don't know. It's hard to say at this point, but like I said, it was rough to watch, and a lot of it, and Coleman Hutzler has to pay for that, and he no longer has a job as a defensive coordinator. There was some talk that he might end up taking a different role on the coaching staff. I don't know if that's going to be the case or not, but it can't be anywhere near the level that he was at currently. And look, this is what you do. This is what happens when you hire one of your buds who is unproven, who hasn't done anything like this in his career prior to taking the defensive coordinator job at Mississippi State when he was just a special teams coach at Alabama. This is what can happen. And you've basically kind of wasted the first 2 years of your program's start under the Jeff Lebby era because you decided you wanted to have a buddy as your defensive coordinator. Now, thankfully, Jeff Lebby made the smart decision. He let him go, and he has now rehired former Mississippi State defensive coordinator, former Mississippi State head coach, Zach Arnett. And this took a lot of us by surprise when we were finding out about it. I guess on Saturday is when we were finding this out. So, look, I think it's a great move. I know there's a lot of people who don't like it and don't like it at all. And I can understand why that is the case. Look, if you're Matt Wyatt and you're Matt Wyatt's family, I completely understand why you don't like it because you felt like you were lied to. And look, I don't know if he lied to people or if he just was telling people what he was hoping and then it went a different direction. I don't know. I mean, my guess is though he probably did not tell the complete truth with Matt Wyatt. My guess is he flat out lied about the offense that was going to be run. But everything that Zach Arnett did as a head coach has no bearing on what he did as a defensive coordinator. When he was a defensive coordinator with by far less talent than what most Mississippi State defenses have had, he put a top 40 or top 50 defense on the field almost every single season. I think there was one season when they were just outside the top 50, but I'm not 100% positive about that. And they were typically top half of the SEC. And this is what you want as a Mississippi State fan. You just want your team to be able to get stops and to get off the field on occasion. There was a little bit of a bend don't break aspect to the Zach Arnett defense. Typically, once teams got inside the 20, they had a really hard time scoring touchdowns. Robbie Falk pointed out on Thunder and Lightning this past weekend that there was only 3 times when Zach Arnett defenses gave up more than 40 points. 2 of them were to Alabama, 1 was to Georgia, and they were all either eventual national champs or teams that played for the national championship. So, and that happened like 8 times under Coleman Hutzler in the 2 years that he was here. So he's a step up in terms of defensive coordinator. I know it was rough when he was the head coach, but he should have never been put in that position. And look, he wasn't going to turn it down. It's every coach's dream to be the head coach of a program. And so he wasn't going to turn that down when it was offered to him, even if he wasn't ready. He probably thought he was ready, but he wasn't. He just was not ready to take on that role with the Bulldogs. And unfortunately, it set our program back. But that wasn't what you can't. When you're factoring in, is he going to be a good hire as a defensive coordinator? You need to look at what he did as a defensive coordinator. Now, if he comes in and he's not the same fiery guy that we saw on the sidelines when he was defensive coordinator, and he's just this monotoned, subdued person that we saw as the head coach, if he's bringing that back, then no, he's not going to do very well. But my guess is he's going to get back to what made him successful as a defensive coordinator when he was doing the job here at Mississippi State. And if he can do that, the Bulldogs should be in really, really good shape. If the defense had just been a little bit better, I really believe that they beat Florida, and I really believe they beat Texas. They don't give up a 17-point lead in the fourth quarter, and that comeback never happens. As a matter of fact, they might even be able to extend it beyond 17 points because they could have held Texas to fewer points than what they had at the time. But I firmly believe you beat Florida. And I think you probably beat Tennessee. And instead of having a 5-7 season, you're looking at a 7-5, 8-4 type season with just a better defense. And I think Zach Arnett can do that. I think he can improve the defense enough to make it worthwhile for Bulldog fans to invest their time and to invest their money into this football program, because that is the biggest question that you have going into year 3 of Jeff Lebby is, do fans truly want to support this program? And prior to this, I don't think they do. Now, like I said, there's a lot of people who aren't happy about this because they can't separate and they can't forget what Zach Arnett did as a head coach. And my thing about this, guys, we've got to stop being as emotional about our college football teams as we are. And look, I say that, and I know everybody's just guffawed hearing that. Is, they're just like, what do you mean to stop being so emotional about our college football teams? That's just what you do. And look, I get it. I understand why we get emotional about it. And I get emotional during the games because you get excited and you get frustrated, and all those things start happening to you when you're actually watching the game take place. But we have to remember that you have to make smart business decisions as coaches, as athletic directors. And that's what these things are. They're business decisions. They're not decisions about how it affects them personally and their fond memories of what it was like when they were a student at Mississippi State or thing like that. And that's the reason why college sports and watching college sports is such an emotional thing for fans, because when we think about Mississippi State, we think back to the times when we were kids and we watched games with our dads and our moms, and it was a family thing. You all went to the game together. And if you were a student at State, which most people who are Mississippi State fans are, they typically went to State, or they wanted to go to State and they ended up maybe going somewhere else as well. But when you start thinking about those things, you start thinking about, where you ate lunch every day with your friends, where your favorite place to go out when you went out on the weekends or during the week. These are the things that you think about because these are fond memories that you have that you attach to the university, and we carry it over to our football teams. And this is why we get so emotional. And so it has such an impact on us, not just personally, but also not just from a fan perspective, but also from a personal perspective. And so, like I said, I understand it. And I understand that that's the reason why some people will never accept Zach Arnett as defensive coordinator until the first few games happen. And if we start winning games because the defense can actually get off the field and can get stops on occasion, I think people will forget all that stuff, and they'll be perfectly fine with having Zach Arnett as our defensive coordinator. And look, there will be some people who probably never will. There will be some people who will probably think that he's going to fail and it's going to end badly. Look, here's the deal. I talked about this a little bit last week. Mississippi State is in a tough position in terms of trying to hire somebody because Jeff Lebby's on the hot seat, and who wants to uproot their family and bring them to Starkville when they may only be here for 9 to 10 months? And that's a tough sell. That's a really tough sell to make to a defensive coordinator. And with Zach Arnett, you don't have to worry about it. He never moved his family, at least from what I understand. So I know there's issues about why he ended up having to be forced to resign from UNLV. I'm not going to get into those stories because they are not confirmed stories. So if you want to try to look them up, you can find them. But my understanding is there is no confirmation on any of the stuff that is rumored to have taken place why he ended up resigning from his job at UNLV. It's not confirmed. There are people who cover the team professionally in Las Vegas who will tell you that none of that stuff actually happened, and that the reason he resigned is probably for different reasons. Look, without confirmed reports, I'm not going to start spreading rumors on this podcast. You can look them up. You can find out for yourself if you're not sure what I'm talking about, because if you know how to use Google, you can find them. But my understanding is a lot of it is just rumor and speculation. I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I don't know at this point. But like I said, if it feels like it's more rumor because you can't find any, like I said, confirmed reporting on the events that took place that led to his resignation. So I'm hoping that if they are true, things like that, I think he's probably figured out that he can't let himself do that again. I'm sure he had too much to drink if those things are true, and it ended up affecting his judgment, and he made some bad choices. Now, other coaching news. Mississippi State has let go of Chad Bumphis. This is a big blow to State fans again, because we get emotional about this, because we're fans and because we're alums and because of everything that we attach to our fandom of Mississippi State. We watched Chad Bumphis play for Mississippi State from 2009 to 2012. He was He had a really good freshman season, struggled a little bit his sophomore and junior seasons, but just really came to life his senior season. That was the year he just really shined as a Bulldog. That's when Derek Russell was implemented as the full-time starter, and he really did a heck of a job with him at quarterback. Obviously, an important part of Mississippi State's legacy at the wide receiver position, because we haven't had a whole lot of great wide receivers, and he's probably one of the better ones. And so to see him let go was tough. Here's the deal. My understanding of the reason why this is happening is it's not from an on-field coaching aspect. It's a recruiting thing. If you look at most people don't follow recruiting well enough to understand who brings what players are brought in by what coaches, and who was most responsible for what recruiting duties. Like I said, most people don't follow it well enough, but for those who do, Anthony Evans, Brennan Thompson, and Aiden Williams are 3 primary top receivers this year. All 3 of them were recruited and brought in by Jeff Lebby. All of the receivers that Chad Bumphis has brought in have had a really hard time getting on the field. Even some of the more highly recruited ones have had a hard time getting on the field. The guys that are the 4 stars. Excuse me. So like I said, it's a difficult thing to watch when one of the guys you cheered for growing up is hired, and you think that's an exciting day for you, and now he's let go. There's some anger around that, but like I said, this actually kind of makes me more hopeful for Jeff Lebby, because he had to know that this was going to be a difficult decision, and that fans were probably not going to respond to this incredibly well, but he made the decision anyway to go ahead and do it. And that, like I said, that's a difficult decision to make, and he made it. And I think the first 2 seasons, I don't think he really wanted to make difficult decisions. He should have made the difficult decision, one, not to bring Coleman Hutzler in to begin with, and bring some of those other people on staff in to begin with. But he made the difficult decision to go ahead and let Hutzler go. We'll probably see some more changes as well. He made the difficult decision to let Bumphis go. And that shows growth to me as a coach. And that's what I want to see from Jeff Lebby as he continues to change and continues to grow as a head coach. I want to see the fact that he's willing to do these things that may not be the easy thing to do. And it's not, and like, I don't think he should necessarily be commended, but it should be encouraging that he's willing to do those things. And like I said, I know we don't want to see Bumphis go. I get that. I know there's a lot of people who are angry about it. And then, like I said, it's not an on-field thing. The receivers played really well on the field. It's not a coaching thing. It feels like it's a recruiting thing, because as many people as Bumphis has been responsible for bringing into the fold, they've got to get on the field. And if the people that he recruits aren't actually playing, that's an issue. So, all right, let's talk about the other big news that came. Mississippi State's going to a bowl. They're playing in the Duke's Mayo Bowl on January 2nd. The last time Mississippi State played in this bowl was Dak Prescott's final game as a Mississippi State Bulldog. It was called the Belk Bowl back then. Now it's the Duke's Mayo Bowl. It's become famous because the winning coach of the Duke's Mayo Bowl, they get covered in mayonnaise. They get a solution of mayonnaise and water, and they dump it all over the winning coach. To me, that should be done to the losing coach, because I hate mayonnaise, but whatever floats your boat. So this was huge. This is important for the Bulldogs. Look, there's a lot of talk about, practice and all that type of stuff. All that's great, and that's true. That's more true though for some teams than it is other teams. It was really true for Mississippi State back in 2013 when Dak Prescott was put in as the starter about halfway through the season. He lost a few games because he got injured, but he was able to have a full schedule of bowl practices from after the 2013 season going into the 2014 season as the starter, and to get reps and to get comfortable in that position. And he ended up having a spectacular Liberty Bowl, and it kind of propelled him into what he was in 2014, where he had an amazing 2014 season, where he was the front runner for the Heisman for probably 3 or 4 weeks. So, like I said, that was huge for him. It's going to be very similar in terms of importance for Kamario Taylor. He is a true freshman this year. He finally gets added as the starter during the Egg Bowl for the Egg Bowl game. And at that point, he needs reps. And one of the things I tweeted, one of the things I talked about after that game was he probably would have not looked quite as rough in the passing game if he had had time and if he'd had reps with the first team starters, with the first team offensive line, with the first team receivers. And he wasn't getting those, unfortunately, because he wasn't playing. Those are all going to Blake Shapen. Well, now that we have a bowl game, he can get those practices in. He can get the timing worked out. And he had 2 weeks of it going into the Egg Bowl week, but he'll get even more going into the Duke's Mayo Bowl. So this is a huge deal for the Bulldogs. They also, with a new defensive coordinator, look, Zach Arnett is not going to be calling the defensive plays. That's not going to be happening, but he can start putting in what he wants to do as a defense during Egg Bowl, during bowl practices. He can start installing that stuff now. He can start making evaluations about players he thinks need to start, players he thinks areas where they need to make adjustments and get new players in under the transfer portal, where they need to recruit better. So these are all things that Zach Arnett can do now that they have bowl practices to be able to use. So this is a huge thing for Mississippi State. They're playing Wake Forest. Wake Forest was 8-4, 4-4 in ACC play. Despite the fact that they ended up winning 3 more games than the Bulldogs, Mississippi State has opened up as a 3-point favorite over the Wake Forest Demon Deacons. Surprised me, to say the least, but I'm really glad that they did, and really glad that they got in this bowl. This will be huge. Like I said, January 2nd, great opportunity for the Bulldogs. I was not expecting this. I kind of heard some things that maybe that was a possibility, but there was so little talk about it after the Egg Bowl a couple of weeks ago that I would just assume that it wasn't actually going to happen. And then next thing we know, it's getting talked about by Brett McMurphy that there's a possibility that there's 5 or 6 teams that could. And basically because Iowa State, Kansas State, and Notre Dame decided that they don't want to play in the bowl this year, Mississippi State was third in line because Auburn decided they weren't going to play in the bowl either. They were third in line, so they ended up getting a bowl game. And like I said, Mississippi State was more than happy to take it. It's good for all the things I talked about with practices. It's good for the fact that Mississippi State players aren't going to be spending as much time at home because they got to be at school or practice, so they don't have family and friends telling them, "Hey, look, you're better than this. You can go somewhere else, get in the portal and help yourself out." Look, that can still happen. So don't get me wrong, but it's not going to be as prevalent as it would have been had they not gotten this bowl invitation. So like I said, I'm excited. I'm grateful for it. I'm hoping that the Bulldogs take advantage of this and they are able to. I'd love for them to win. I mean, the only real drawback you have for this is you could lose the game and go 5-8. That's a possibility. The only other real possibility is injury, but I mean, people get injured all the time. So that I'm not really worried about. Yes, they could get injured, but I'm not too terribly worried about injuries at this point. There are far more advantages to playing this game than there are disadvantages. Let's just put it that way. So look, if they get injured, they've got 9 months to heal. Even if it was a serious injury, normally you can get recovered from those in time to make it to the next game. Look at what happened to Nick Fitzgerald he was injured Thanksgiving weekend in 2017, and he was back ready to go in 2018. Look, I know he was not quite as. Most people will tell you that he probably lost a little bit of a step after that injury, but I mean that's just part of the game. But he was still back and playing like he had never been injured at the beginning of the 2018 season. So even if somebody does get hurt, they will have time to recover before the next season. So. Like I said, I'm not going to worry about that too much, but I know there were some people who were saying, why go play a meaningless bowl game if you risk injury or something like that. So there were some people I think who were just still upset about the season and just ready to be done with it. And that's fine. If you want to be done with it, be done with it. But there's too many positives for Mississippi State to just turn this down. So I'm glad that they took it. So, all right, real quick. I want to talk about Josh Hubbard real quick. Because this was the bad news that we got on Sunday. We got the good news, and then we got the bad news. This is, if you're a listener to Thunder and Lightning, this is the science at work for them. We got really good news with the football team on Sunday morning, getting a bowl game. Then we got some really bad news. One, they'd lost the game. They lost to San Francisco, who was 5-4 at the time. They're now 6-4. It's a bad loss regardless. The other issue, and the bigger issue, is Josh Hubbard ends up going down with an injury after basically he was backpedaling after a shot, and he ends up stepping on Sean Jones' foot, turns his ankle, ends up missing, going out of the game, wasn't able to put weight on the foot at the time. He came back with it iced up and walking on it, but like I said, he wasn't dressed out at that point, and he also he had it completely iced up. It didn't look good. Look, my guess is he's probably going to be out for a little while. Hopefully be back in time for conference play. When you roll an ankle, it's always, you never really know just how serious it can be, because if you roll it really badly, you can like actually tear ligaments and have to have surgery done, or it could just be a thing where he just needs to kind of rest it and let it heal on its own, but that can take 4, 5, 6 weeks as well. So it just depends on how bad it was. We haven't gotten an update. At least I haven't seen an update, but that's the really bigger issue. And it really sucks because you finally got a decent win when you beat Georgia Tech on the road earlier in the week. So you're thinking maybe they can build off that. Maybe they can kind of put some wins together here before they get into conference play, because the schedule is starting to ease up a little bit. They have Utah this weekend, and after that, the only other real big challenge they have is Memphis. So you were thinking that maybe they can kind of put some things together now that they got a decent win against a decent opponent. And Georgia Tech's not great, but they were better than a lot of the teams that they have been playing and losing to. So, but all that kind of changes now that you lose Josh Hubbard, and how long he's going to be out, I don't know. Like I said, we'll have to kind of wait and see. And I haven't heard anything about an update on what his status is, how long he might be out, or if he might even be able to come back for Utah. We don't know, but like I said, it's a blow, because I was thinking, well, maybe they can kind of put some things together here. And unfortunately, when you see him go down, it doesn't work out that way. And Mississippi State ends up losing the game to San Francisco. And you just don't, and at this point, because you don't have your best player on the floor, every game could be lost. Doesn't matter who the opponent is, doesn't matter how bad they are, every game could be lost. And that's kind of what you're looking at with Mississippi State right now. Without Josh Hubbard, and until he makes it back on the floor, it's really hard to predict a win for the Bulldogs at any point. So we'll have to see where he is. And one of the disappointing things, I've always been a big fan of Sean Jones Jr. I thought he's really been productive in the limited amount of time that he has played prior to this season. Well, he's been thrust into the starting rotation, and he has just really struggled. His field goal percentage has dropped. He's getting more points and rebounds and assists, but a lot of that is simply because his minutes have basically doubled since his previous years as a Bulldog. I mean, Hubbard ends up stepping on his foot and causing it to get hurt. On Sunday, when they're down by a point and needing to get a basket to win, Sean Jones ends up being the one that turns the ball over and allowing San Francisco to extend it to 3, and basically making it where it was almost impossible for Mississippi State to win that game. He's just really struggled. I mean, he's had a couple of nice moments this year, but most of the time when he's on the floor, good things aren't happening around him. And like I said, it's been really frustrating to watch, because I think he's a senior. I mean, he's been around this team for a while. He's been playing for a while. So I don't know. It's just been really weird and hard to watch. So, all right, guys. Well, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up there. Like I said, I want to talk next when we record again, probably either Thursday or Friday. We'll talk more about the college football playoff. We'll talk more about just what's taking place there. I don't know that Mississippi State stuff will happen. So anyway, appreciate you guys.